All right, so here's a few news articles. I got 10 minutes before the class starts officially. So this guy thinks you should quit using Android phones. There's another one like this, or quit using Samsung phones. But anyway, the issue here is there are attacks that will steal the Google Authenticator tokens from some devices. And this guy doesn't like it anywhere because it doesn't use the secure element. And therefore, in principle, another app on the phone can steal it. Although there is a sandboxing feature that ought to prevent that, but there are weaknesses in some versions of Android. Probably the worst problem with Android has always been that you don't really get the updates. And it's been well known for a long time that if you buy an Android phone, your carrier will typically block the updates in order to keep charging you money for features that Google would have given you for free. But the thing he just came out of a year or two ago was that some of these devices will then lie and tell you they put on updates when they haven't, including some Samsung devices, although certainly not all of them. So it is pretty gruesome. And I suppose if you're using an Android phone, at the very least, you got to run antivirus. And you might seriously think about putting in a custom ROM and just taking control of the updates yourself, rather than letting your carrier control it. Anyway, he doesn't much like iOS devices either, but I generally think for most people, they're still a lot safer because they really do get updated more. But anyway, and also there's no question, I think, that the Apple Store is much cleaner than the Google Store. The Google Store is full of malware, and a lot of people install apps from outside the Google Play Store even, whereas in iOS, they really vigorously keep the malware out of the store. So I didn't know about this group. They're talking about this is really important. The Emotet is the most dangerous malware operation, they say. I'm not protecting an enterprise with a fleet of Windows machines, but if you are, then you do learn which groups are sending these campaigns of malware against you. And Emotet is apparently quite a criminal infrastructure. It's been around for years, and they infect machines, and now they rent those machines to others to run other malware on them. All they do is put a loader on your machine that can load different malware. And so they formed a group of people who are vigorously following them, finding the indicators of compromise, telling people how to clean it off, and so on. And they are convinced that the manufacturers of the malware are following them too, because often as soon as they find something, they will immediately update to get past it. So anyway, it's an interesting group. And they also mentioned that quite a few members of the group have to join anonymously and post in secret because they belong to corporations that put everything they find behind a non-disclosure agreement, and they are secretly breaking those non-disclosure agreements. Breaking non-disclosure agreements is very common in the tech sector. If you go to DEF CON, there's a special kind of talk called a Sky Talk, which is where people break their non-disclosure agreements, and therefore they don't allow any recording. It is one of the many ethically gray things that go on in the cybersecurity world. This is pretty impressive. Apache Tomcat is a very important web server used by large companies, and apparently they've all had a bug for quite a while, although I think this would have been pretty easy to avoid because apparently your Tomcat servers are listening not only on 80 or 443 ports, which you'd expect, but they have another service listening on port 8009, which is for one Tomcat server to talk to another, and that service has weaknesses. But I would think that nobody would expose that to the internet unless they're sort of stupid, and apparently there are a few that have, but in any case, reminds me of a vulnerability that came out a week ago in Cisco Discovery Protocol. Many devices have a special communication means that is not intended to reach customers, but only to help them talk to the other devices of the same type on your local network. And a lot of those are vulnerable. But normally you're not intended to expose them to the world, so the vulnerability would be rather small. Anyway, this is pretty interesting. The Google Play Store is not the most dangerous app store on the internet. That is this other thing called 9game.com by the total amount of malware on it. And so anyway, it's good to see there are quite a lot of different Android stores. The one I didn't see anywhere here was the Amazon store for the Amazon Kindle. Maybe it's not important enough, but Anyway, they're considering which ones of these have the most malware. Google does make some effort to clean the malware out of the Play Store, but they are fabulously unsuccessful at that. And they frequently find huge campaigns of malware in the store. Facebook is suing an SDK maker that put code in apps. They paid developers to put code in the apps, which they would then use to harvest the data from Facebook users. So it's kind of funny because Facebook has been in a world of trouble for selling data in inappropriate ways, but apparently they still don't like it when people steal the data from them. This I found very interesting. PDF has an encryption option, just like Microsoft Office documents do, and it turns out that that encryption option is in fact pretty miserable. It is possible to encrypt only part of a PDF. In fact, that's usually what's done. And in fact, since they use cipher block chaining, which is something we'll be attacking, our cipher block chaining has some problems. The main one we attack in the cryptography class right now is the padding oracle attack, but I might try and get this working and throw it in because he found another kind of attack where you can decrypt it if you find a block where you know what the data is, and it turns out there is in fact a block where they encrypt something and they also store exactly the same data in plain text. So there's a block where you know the plain text, and from that you can deduce information you shouldn't be able to deduce and alter the crypto system. So anyway, sounds like a fun attack, and I'd like to learn more about it. This one was very complicated, and I think I'm not going to go through it today. It's incredible how people are freaking out about coronavirus. 14 companies didn't go to RSA. Amazon has now told everyone to halt travel, not only internationally, but in the US, which is a huge thing. So it's incredible how rapidly people are freaking out about it. Of course, I'm tuning in remotely today because I have a cold, and I don't imagine I have the coronavirus, but it is a nasty cold, and it seems like a politically incorrect move to be spreading a cold at this point. I think it would distract people. So I'm hoping I'll be able to come back on Monday night and resume my face-to-face classes, but I took a week or so off so I don't spread this around. And I see a chat message coming in. Went to RSA and it was kind of slow. Yeah, well, I know 14 big companies were not there. So I would think it might be less crowded. I'm wondering if DEF CON's going to be canceled. We'll see. They just announced the call for events and parties and stuff, although not talks yet for DEF CON. They did cancel DEF CON China. And, I think in the next couple of weeks, we're going to see if the number of cases appear to be growing rapidly in America. And I'd say by next week or the week after, we'll know it's either shrinking the way Trump said it would or growing like crazy. And I think if it goes from like 2 to 10 to 20 or 40, then everybody will freak and start canceling all sorts of public events. I'm wondering if they'll close the college. So we'll see what happens. But in other countries, they have been closing all the colleges and telling them to take a month off and such. So I'll update you folks by email on my website if that happens. In my opinion, if they close the college, we can just keep going like this. I'll just do it all by Zoom without us physically gathering. But the administrators, anyway, I'll let you know what happens when I hear from the college. But I wouldn't be surprised if the administrators are instructed to close the college by an authority figure in the next couple of weeks. But we'll see what happens. Anyway, these guys have measured the collapse of the wave function in quantum mechanics, which is one of the biggest mysteries in quantum mechanics. And they have shown that it is a gradual process and begun to understand what causes it, which is a big deal for quantum computers and all other quantum physics. Anyway, so we're now to the official time. So let me talk about this class. So this is CNIT 50 that only meets a few times. We're up here. We're going to do modules 7, 8, and 9 today. And there are a couple modules due, although there is no penalty for turning things in late in this class, although I'd encourage you to turn them in on time just to stay with it. And so let me just get to my slides about that, and then I'll demonstrate a bit of it. Hope I remembered to start the recording. I did. Good. All right. So there's 3 modules here. Module 7 is the simple one and actually repeats stuff we've talked about before. When you are searching, I've mentioned that just searching with a word the way you would in Google is possible in Splunk, and I do it all the time, but the Splunk experts don't like it because technically it wastes some CPU time and is slower. So filtering by time is the most efficient thing. You should always specify what index you want to search for optimal performance. And of course, if you have more search terms, then it limits the results and makes it faster. So they say filter as soon as possible. Don't use wildcards excessively. Things like star fail, it's because it has a star at the start of a string, it's going to have to process every string and every event, whereas giving it at least a few letters before the star will greatly decrease the number of events it has to go through. And using an or instead of wildcards is better, but these are very standard procedures. So you should have an index equals security or index equals sales if you want to, or at the start, something like that would greatly improve the speed of searches. And you can put a wildcard in the index and you can search without an index, but they don't recommend these things. You can see the index field. If you search without an index, then you'll see there's two values of index here and you can go see what they are. Of course, that is a question of the person who installed your Splunk, whether they really did figure out how to sort the data into useful indices, which is an important thing for them to do. In our case, we have all the data in one index called bots v1 for this extra credit project where you're going through boss to the SOC. So the index field doesn't really do anything there, but it in a real enterprise deployment, it presumably would. So Splunk has, for some reason, written their own search language. And this I've heard from Splunk insiders. I've known people who worked at Splunk and then left and worked somewhere else and then came back. And they said, this is the annoying thing. Every company has some kind of annoying technical debt. And for some reason, instead of just using normal SQL like everybody else, they wrote their own search language, which is a little different than SQL and kind of irritating to insiders. But anyway, that's the way it is. So you search for something, you define the index, you have some fields like source type equals access, underscore star, status equals 503. Those are the criteria that will limit the events you find. Then you pipe it. This is, by the way, something to get used to if you're going to use Microsoft PowerShell. It's the same. You have an expression, and the result of that expression is a group of objects. And you can then pipe it to another expression, which will further filter it. So take those events and calculate statistics, like the sum of price, rename the field lost revenue, then evaluate. Lost revenue is dollars, and turn it into a string with commas. So this will calculate the total amount of price of events of this type, which appear to represent people who tried to purchase a product and failed because they got a status of 503, which is one of the error codes. So that's why this is reasonable to call this lost revenue. These are people who tried to purchase a product, but due to some kind of error, did not get to purchase the product. And that's fine. And they give you the names of these various components of this complex search. So you got search terms, what you're looking for, and commands that do things like statistics or create a chart, and then functions that do things like sum and average, arguments and clauses. All we really have used much in this class are search terms, and that's the most important thing, of course, is to find the right events. And if you're willing to be sort of if you're just trying to find something like what happened and you yourself are the technical person running Splunk, then all you really need typically is search terms. So you find the events and then you can read through the events to see what happened. But if you're trying to prepare a report to present your findings to a customer or management, then you really have to try harder to make it beautiful and clear and remove all the extra fields and so on. I used to work in finance and I used Excel and Access, and my reports were all kind of technical and complicated looking. And then some guy came on the team that really knew how to do this stuff in Excel. And his reports were beautiful with graphics and nice tables with pretty titles. And I imitated him. His stuff was really good. His stuff was ready to give a customer and my stuff wasn't. So these features here are all for decoration, but decoration really matters in business. Anyway, so you have a search, then you pass it to an intermediate results table, and then you pipe it more. So here you have, you fetch events that match, then you get events the top 10 users, and then you sort it by percentages and so on. So those are the steps you go through. The pipeline can just be one horizontal line like this, but by default, Splunk has auto formatting, so each pipe command goes to a new line, and that makes it more readable, which is nice. It colors things to help you. You'll see Boolean operators and modifiers turn orange, and commands are blue, and arguments are green, and functions are purple. The main use I have for this is that I know if I spelled something correctly when it changes color. Anyway, but it is there to try to make it more readable. You can turn that off or adjust it if you want to. And you can make a table. By default, if you don't tell Splunk what to do at the output, it will just fill the bottom pane with raw events, which are often pages long of details about each event. And that is usually not very helpful. It would be better to figure out what you want and choose 3 or 4 fields you like and just have a table like this. That would make it a lot easier to read through a series of events and find what you want if you know what fields contain the information you need. So you can rename fields, which will just, if you do rename a field, you can take client IP and product ID, and here you can pipe rename product ID as capital P product ID, and then it will just change the label of this field here. So that's a way to make things prettier, and probably a very good idea when you're dealing with technical terms like HTTP method and such. And once you rename it, remember, you are taking a output, which is a group of objects, and you are changing it with each command. So here, if I rename product ID as capital product ID, and I rename action as customer action, if I then try to make a table with action, action no longer exists. This rename is not just a decoration change, it really names the field in the object with the new name. So if you want to refer to the in a later part, you're going to have to use the new name. So that's just a thing to be aware. And so in this case, you will have no results because you had some things called action, but you renamed them and then tried to find some things called action that no longer existed. Here, you had some fields called action, you renamed it customer action, and then you looked for customer action. So now you get a table named customer action. All right, so fields will let you extract certain fields and show them. You can exclude fields or include them. Including them and excluding all the others is the thing that speeds up performance because it doesn't have to bother including as much information in the output. Excluding a field does not speed up the query because it now has to process every field to check to make sure if it's not the one you asked to exclude. Anyway, so here's an example where doing fail star or invalid shows you kinds of results in 1 second, but if you specify fields, user, app, and source IP, then it takes only half as much time because it doesn't have to report everything about every event. Anyway, dedupe is just a way to remove duplicate values. So if you here you have beach games, beads and games, and another beach games, and another beach games, but if you dedupe by vendor, you'll just get one entry for beach games. Notice you won't get the whole story anymore. I'll show you this live in a little while. You can also dedupe by multiple fields and like vendor and vendor city, and then you will have 2 beach games entries, one for Miami and one for Fort Lauderdale, because it dedupes by the combination of the 2. Here, you've totally lost the data from beach games and Fort Lauderdale by deduping by just one field. You can sort. You can sort by ascending or descending by putting a minus in front. You can sort with a limit, the limit how many items are included in the sort. All right, and this one is very strange. I'll demonstrate it live. As far as I can tell, by the way, this statement is false. They say that if you sort with a minus vendor, comma vendor city, then it will sort descending vendor and ascending vendor city. So the descending vendor has beauty and then beach at the bottom, so that's opposite alphabetical. And the vendor city goes from Butte to Miami, which is forward. So it tells you right here that if you put a space after the minus sign, then the minus sign will apply to both of these fields. But the example below shows exactly the same thing as this one. It does not work. And in fact, when I tried it on my real Splunk, it does not work. So here you've got one of those irritating situations where the official documentation tells you one thing, but as far as I can tell, it's wrong. And the actual product behaves differently. I don't recall seeing a question about this on the certification exam, but if I had seen one, I wouldn't have known what answer to give. Do you want the answer from the documents or do you want the truth? But anyway, nothing is perfect. And apparently the Splunk documentation has an error here, as far as I can tell, unless I'm misunderstanding something. If some student figures out how to do this, let me know and I'll give you extra credit to have a minus sign apply to both fields. I could not make it work. Let me just do that now. That's a good idea. I've got some demos set up here. So if I go to my Splunk here, if I just do this search, this is one you may remember from before. This is the one that finds the events that are going backwards from the web server, where it loads malicious files onto the web server to deface the web page. It's we used it for the first few, as part of the first 5 questions in Boss of the SOC. So this is just HTTP that comes from the web server, and there are only 8 or 9 such events. And as you can see, it takes several seconds to find them, but now it's done. 9 events found, and here they are. So here you've got these long events that you might have to page through to figure out what's going on. Down here, you get more useful information. But in general, this is what I was talking about before. This might be useful to a technical expert, but it's harder for other people to read. So the first thing you might want to do is just put it in a table. So I'm going to put it in a table of destination and request. And when I pasted that in, it didn't automatically format, but I think, what is it, Shift Enter? Yeah, Shift Enter will do it if the automatic formatting doesn't take, and then you get this prettier view. So instead of showing me just everything about these events, it will do the same query and then give me a table with just the destination and the request. And so it's found 1. And I guess it doesn't want to make the table until it finds them all. Now, here they come. It's found 3. So here's the destination IP, and here's a request. That one has no request field for some reason, but some of them do. There they come. So one of them has no request. Here's various other requests. Notice I have some duplicates. This 23 address has 1 with no request and 2 with the same get for poison ivy. And then there's other ones down here. So that's one thing I could do. The next thing I might try is to dedupe them. Let me just check my instructions. Yeah, dedupe. So let's dedupe by, oops, I got to pipe and then dedupe. And by the way, it will offer to do the rest of the typing for me, which is a good idea. If I dedupe by dest and then search for that, then it'll take a few minutes or maybe 10 seconds to run. All right. All right. Now it's found 1 destination address, and it's just showing me the first value, which was no request at all. And then it finds the other request, and it just shows me the first value. So deduping by just 1 field has in fact destroyed a lot of useful information. I really wanted to see all the requests, but by deduping by just 1 field, I don't get them all. So it would be a lot better to dedupe by both of them. Dedupe by dest and request. And if I do that, then I'll get a table which doesn't waste my time with duplicate entries, but it does show me all the values of dest and request. There we go. So now I have less values, and I have, by the way, it removed the one with an empty value of request, which is an interesting fact. If there's not, and so it shows me this get for that, and then these gets for that other addresses. So that's a nicer way to summarize it. Now I might want to sort them. I have destination going from 2 to 1, and these just seem to be sort of scrambled. And so I could try to sort them. So let's try that. Pipe sort by minus dest. and then request. See what that does. This is the one that annoyed me because it does not seem to work. So according to the Splunk documentation, minus should sort dest in increasing value, or decreasing instead of increasing, and request should now sort in increasing, which is the default. So let's see how that looks. Okay, so now 108 comes first and 23 comes lower, and I'm pretty sure Splunk is smart enough to interpret an IP address as a number and not as a string. So this is decreasing towards smaller values. This is increasing, core, JED, language, poison. It's nice alphabetically increasing. Now, according to the documents, if I put a space here, this minus should now apply to the request, and this should reverse order, putting poison ivy on top. But when I tried it, it did not work. I don't suppose this is super important. It's just a little annoying that they go out of their way to actually make a slide to tell you this, and it's not true. So I wonder if they need to have some sort of update of either the product or the documentation here. And well, now, yet poison ivy did not come to the top. In fact, they don't seem to be sorted at all anymore, which is a little screwy. So it'll be interesting to know what's going on there. Anyway, let's go back to the slides and move on to the next section. So then there's these transforming commands. You can get just the top values. By default, it'll give you the top 10 values and show it to you in table format. So your top source IP will show you the source IPs, and that's all it will show you, just this one field. And then it will count and percent. It won't show you more fields from the data. It'll just show you how many and what percent of them had that field. If you want more, you can specify a different limit, like limit equals 20 or something. You can count a single field. All right. And that's limit. Limit equals 0 reports all unlimited results, by the way. That's equal to infinity. If you put the show perk here, it will, percent column is displayed. If show perk equals F is how you get rid of it. Show perk is there, always show percent, but if you want to get rid of it, you turn it off with show perk equals F. And you can have a by clause, so it will give you two fields where you're counting, observing X webcat code by username. So now you can have a table with two entries and count how many times those combinations of entries appear. This is very useful, of course, because often you want information from more than one field. And you can rename the fields, of course, with just as count field equals string is how you do it. Count field equals string. It's not as here, it's just equals to give it a different title, which is important to make it pretty. And you can use rare, which is the opposite of top. Neither of them will include any blank fields, but rare will include the least common items, and top will include the most common items. You've got stats to do all the other things you might want to do, like sum and average and count and values and so on. These are the common statistics you'll see in every database product, and it sort of reminds me that Splunk is really nothing more than a database like SQL or anything else. Always have these commands. So you can do a count. If you just do a count, it'll just give you the total number of events. If you do count as potential issues, it'll just give you a different name, but the same number. If you count a field, it will count the values where that field is not empty, which might be a different number than counting all the events. And you can do count, you can do by fields, so I can count by user, app, and vendor action. Then I'll get user, app, and vendor action and a number of how many times that combination of those three values occurred, which is extremely useful. You can do a distinct count, which will tell you how many of those values are unique, which is another useful value. You might have 10 entries, but maybe there's only 2 different values in there, and those are both interesting numbers for different situations. And you can do sums of a numerical field, like a dollar field or something else with a number. You can add them up, and you can do by, as we could with anything else, to sort of separate multiple stats. And you can do averages for numeric fields, of course. You can do lists to list all the field values without bothering to count them, just so you see the entries there. This is essentially what you get if you go into the lower pane here. If you get rid of all these things and you show raw events again, then you get essentially the same thing by going to the lower left here and clicking on things. So I'll wait a few seconds for this to come up. It's not done yet because there'd be a check mark up here. There we are. And remember, you can point down here and see ACK packets out or bytes out has 2. And so if you click that, it'll show you the values here. It gives you the count also, but the values just appear there. This is very much the same kind of, this is a count of the type we've been talking about. It gives you the number of counts, and the percent. All right. So values of a field give you this. You can have values of user as usernames and count of user as attempts. So now you have by source IP, so that's included. You have the count of the user. Here is the number of attempts, and you have the values here. So it tells you there were 3 attempts, and those are the actual values. That's a kind of handy chart. All right. And you can format this thing. All these charts have a little pencil here, and if you click that, you can change the color and so on. And you can change the format, whether to put in commas around the thousands and things like that. And so here's some examples. You can choose the precision, the minimum and maximum, and so on. All right, so you can make your thing as pretty as you like. So I think that's all I wanted to tell you about that. You should be working on your modules, installing your Splunk. If you're having trouble getting Splunk working, I can help you when I come in next week. Sorry, Sam, what search mode are we currently in? Oh, in my, I leave mine in the default, and so I think it's the verbose mode. Smart mode this is currently verbose. If I go to smart mode, that's a very good point. I think that will get rid of that big mess here. Let's see. I think smart mode is the default. And is it searching? I think it is. Yeah, there we go. Now it looks like it pretty much the same thing in smart mode and default mode. But fast mode, let's see how much faster it is. That is quite a bit faster. And the only difference, I think, is see less right there. Anyway, yeah, all right, good, sure. I really don't see a huge difference between the modes when I do it. The Splunk documentation makes a big deal out of it. For the cases I've used, I've never noticed a significant difference between the modes. Good. Any other questions? All right, I'm going to stop the recording. I'll leave the share going a little bit so I can get more questions if any come in.